Dearest gentle readers, I'm so glad you can join me for another episode of Fix and Rex, a fanfiction podcast. I'm WMN. Today, we'll be sharing one of your recommendations for favorite pollen winter holiday fanfiction. As always, thank you for tuning in. Action, drama, holiday fluff. Today we bring you Dashing Through the Snow, written by Mrs. Tark. This story is rated for general audiences. For more information, please reference the tags in the episode description of this podcast. "Faster, Colin, faster!" Penelope squealed from his side. They had left the rest of his family at the house, still decorating the grand hall, hitching Colin's lean stallion to the open-air sleigh, on a mission to gather additional holly. Penelope had never ridden in such a vehicle before. Her mother refused to leave home when there was too much snow for the carriages to run. She delighted in the smooth way it glided across the frozen landscape. Colin may have gotten carried away. He delighted in the way Penelope's eyes twinkled each time their speed increased. With every hill they crested, the sled's runners leaving the ground just enough to lift them from the seat before bumping and crashing back down onto the plush velvet cushion. Penelope's grin widened. Her tinkling laughter as he took them around the frozen pond rang out in a delightful chorus in time with the rhythmic jingle from the bells woven through the horse's tail. She was tucked close to his side as he drove the horse, sharing a heavy wool blanket across their laps. He was doing all he could to cause those beautiful sounds to continue to bubble forth from Penelope's lips. Barreling up small hills and taking corners so tight the sleigh would rock to the side, cutting around on only one runner until it straightened again. His laughter had long since joined hers, each time the sled jostled them in the seat, or he had to wrap his arms around her waist to ensure she did not fly clear to the ground. The first time she'd tipped out over the edge, he'd slowed the horse, fearful and concerned for her safety. It was her unbidden shriek of excitement and pleas for more of the same that goaded him on until they were freewheeling through the frozen moor. His soul felt as clear and bright as the noon winter sky, and judging by the way she shined at his side, so did Penelope. Thus, when Penelope cried out for more speed, he'd crack the whip and aimed straight for the next hill. Only, it wasn't a hill. The horse galloped straight into the snowdrift, hitting it in the chest and halting it in its tracks. A twisted neigh rang out as the sled, carried on by the speed it had gathered, lifted into the air, turning itself over and burying its riders in the deep snow. The sunny day turned dark in an instant. Colin fought to keep his bearings, freeing his boot from what may have been the front of the sleigh above him. Snow invaded every opening in his kit, already cold and wet against his neck, his wrists, and his hip. He tried to right himself, realizing that what he thought was up was in fact down. Eventually kicking his way free of the frigid cocoon, lifting his head out of the snowbank, and finding himself eye to eye with the sleigh's bottom. The harness must have snapped in the accident, as his horse was not to be seen, hoofprints leading back towards the stables, and the faint sound of bells in the distance told him he was alone. Except Penelope. His already racing heart beat in double time when he realized his friend had not yet emerged from the same bank he'd been stuck in, nor had he heard her make a sound. "Penelope?" he called nervously. "Nothing." "Pen?" His shaky voice called louder. Still nothing. "Pen!" he hollered into the eerily still wreckage. By the time her name had crossed his lips for a third time, he dove back down into the snow, frantically digging and trying to haul the sled upright himself. But it would not budge, and she was not there. Worried he was digging futilely in the wrong spot, Colin stood again, trying to recall those harrowing seconds before the world went dark. Was she thrown clear of the sleigh? He didn't think so. But her warm leg wasn't pressed to his any longer when everything finally stopped moving. He scrambled to her side of the wreck, falling to his knees and desperately shoveling back the snow with his hands. No. No, no, no. Not like this. Not again. Not at Christmas. Not Pen. Not his Pen. Tears were starting to sting his cheeks and cloud his vision as dread settled into his chest. Memories of that awful spring day almost a decade ago started flooding in. Even through his determination, his mind began to question why the idea of losing his friend would feel so similar to the memory of losing his father. He loved his father. Nothing could compare to that loss unless he loved her. He loved her. He was in love with Penelope Featherington and likely had been for a very long time. The realization left him feeling utterly bereft. Why had he realized now? Now that she might be gone forever? Colin began pleading with anyone or anything that might be listening to find her, for her to be all right. He pledged that, if given a second chance, he would never take her for granted again. The moment the promise left his lips, his hand struck something different, oddly solid yet yielding. His focus followed his hand down to the spot, studying it curiously for a split second before realizing he was touching the flannel-covered shoulder of Penelope. "Pen!" he cried out, noting as he paddled the snow away from her neck and face that she was not moving, was not struggling to get out, was not reaching for him. He felt his throat closing as he uncovered her unnaturally quieted face. A curl of fog rose from her sagging lips, confirmation that she was still breathing, still alive. He followed her cloak down to her feet, and finding she was not trapped by the sleigh, dug his arms in around her and stood, finally pulling her free. He fell backwards out of the bank with her in his arms, landing on top of the snow. Colin could see Penelope was nearly soaked through, her warm flannels useless against the elements now that they were wet. Colin took his heavy wool overcoat off without a second thought and wrapped her in it. He could feel the wind biting through his linen shirt and waistcoat, but his only concern was for Penelope. "I'm sorry, Pen. I'm so sorry," he choked, brushing her disheveled curls back from her face. "Please, wake up. I need you. Please." He held her in his arms and pressed a warm kiss to her freezing forehead. He hovered there a moment until he felt a strange sensation, fluttering, against his chin. He pulled back in surprise, then looked on as her eyelids slowly opened. "Colin? What?" A deep shiver interrupted her question. "That last hill was a snowbank. We crashed. Are you all right?" "I think so. I'm just so cold." Her eyes were fearful, pained. He knew he needed to act. "I've got you, Pen. Just try to hold on." Colin lifted Penelope in his arms and began trudging toward home. It was cold. Both of them were soaked through and the footing was unsure. It was nearly a mile back to Aubrey Hall. He wasn't sure if they would make it, but nothing could stop him from trying. He had never been more relieved than when he saw Benedict's horse galloping out through the tree line less than a minute into their journey. Benedict pulled his horse to a halt just a few feet in front of the pair, jumping down immediately to see how he could help. "I was hanging silk snowflakes in the window when I saw your horse walk up dragging its harness. What happened?" "A hill that wasn't. We drove straight into a snowbank. The sleighs just ahead upsot in the drift." Benedict had moved closer, their precarious condition becoming more clear as he took in their wet clothing and Penelope's weak state. "Miss Featherington, is she—" "She was knocked unconscious for a time, buried in the snow. She's just come to. We must get her warm soon or I fear she will fall ill." Colin did his best to explain through the fear he knew was evident in his voice. Benedict looked back over his shoulder, assessing the distance, then back to his brother. "Take my horse, ride back, and get her warm. I will walk." Colin did not argue. Benedict helped him to lift Penelope onto the horse's withers, then climb into the saddle. He took up the reins in one hand, wrapping his other arm around Penelope and holding her tight to his chest. He thanked his brother, then spurred the horse on, refusing to waste another second. Penelope was chattering violently with cold, small whimpers reaching Colin's ears as he kept his eyes fixed ahead, galloping the whole way back through the same tracks he'd made earlier. He did his best to share his warmth with her, hooking his chin over the crook of her neck and keeping her nestled in his arm. But the whipping wind from their speed cut through them both. He was jumping down and pulling Penelope into his arms before the horse truly even came to a stop. Colin carried her in his arms, refusing to let her feet touch the ground despite her weak protests of independence. The pallor of her cheeks, usually so rosy, shook him with fear, realizing that although they had reached their destination, she still had a long journey to safety. Colin refused to put her down once inside, even as his mother and several maids and footmen swarmed him. He carried her up the grand staircase and into the ladies' wing, directly to what he correctly guessed was her bedchamber, barking orders the whole way to have a hot bath drawn, build up her fire, bring up hot tea and stew, and bring extra blankets. The staff obeyed without question, buzzing about to do as he'd asked. It was only when he'd sat Penelope by the fire, a nervous lady's maid holding an armful of dry clothes staring at him, did he realize he couldn't stay. Penelope was still shivering, so hard it interfered with her ability to speak. Yet her brow knit together as she regarded him with something that looked like both confusion and wonder. Colin took her icy hand in his, layering it between his cheek and much larger hand, pressing into it with urgency and anguish. He met her eyes, allowing her to see the wild fear behind his, then turned, pressing a desperate kiss to her palm, hopeful it conveyed even a fraction of how he was feeling. He rose, but bent down to warm her cheek with his hand. "I wish to speak with you the moment you are decent again." He pressed one last kiss to her forehead, then gave a nod to the dumbstruck maid and left to the hallway. "Mamma? Antony?" Colin had not noticed his eldest brother and mother had followed him upstairs. "I wish to speak with you both in the library. Would you see to a pot of tea while I find my own dry clothing? I shall be down post-haste." Colin entered the library not 10 minutes later, no worse for the wear, as he had been far better outfitted for the elements. He did treat himself to a hot cup of tea, as much for his nerves as to help drive off the last bit of chill in his bones. Looking up after his first sip, he found his mother and brother watching him studiously. "I suppose you wish to know why I've asked you here," he began, trying his best not to simply blurt out what he wanted. Antony looked ready to say something fierce, but their mother beat him to it, looking at him warmly and, was it knowingly? She always was so intuitive with her children. "Dearest, what has happened? Are you quite all right?" Colin blushed lightly, smiling at the floor. His mother always knew just when he needed a moment of calm, a supportive word or touch to reassure him. The only other person who treated him that way was Pen. A warmth spread through his chest that he was certain did not come from the tea. Colin did his best to recount his and Penelope's harrowing crash, downplaying, of course, the risks he'd been taking driving the sleigh, while emphasizing his dramatic rescue of Penelope. Antony paled, while his mother looked as if she might swoon. By the time he had finished the retelling, he felt he'd worked up the nerve to broach the real reason he gathered them in the library. What I did not expect, what took me by even more surprise than the overturning of our sled, was the realization that I am in fact quite in love with Miss Featherington. I have asked to speak with you about it here because I would like to view the family jewels. Violet gasped loud enough that Colin was concerned Penelope might overhear her from the other end of the large mansion. Antony looked terribly serious for a moment. Then he grinned. "Dash it, Colin. Now I am to owe Daphne £2. You know how insufferable she is when she wins." Colin quirked his head while he considered his brother's meaning, then matched his jovial expression. "You will learn in time. Never underestimate Penelope." Antony retrieved the velvet-lined ring box and returned to where Colin and his mother sat, opening the box as he set it on the table between them. "Perhaps an amethyst," his mother suggested, always partial to the stone herself. Colin shook his head. "No, not quite." His eyes danced through the rings of different styles and stones until he found the perfect one. He plucked out the dainty gold ring, fitting it to the tip of his pinky for closer examination. The emerald, pearl, and ruby ring was everything he wanted. Not overly large or ostentatious. He knew Penelope would appreciate something delicate more, something with meaning. The small central emerald matched his eyes, something Penelope would surely notice. The 4 slightly larger round pearls that surrounded it reminded him of the snow they'd both been buried in. And set between each of the pearls was a tiny ruby, representing to him the small redhead he'd pulled from the bank. Plus, the whole ring was gold, red, and green, the colors of Christmastide, and would always remind them of when they became betrothed. That is, so long as she said yes. "This one," he nodded decisively, looking to his mother for approval nevertheless. He did not expect the tears that filled her eyes. "Fitting, I suppose. That one was a gift from your father." Colin took the ring from his fingertip, moving to replace it in the box, until his mother stilled his hand. "He got it for me after you were born. I've forgotten until you brought it forth just now. But it was always meant to be yours." After a long soak in a hot bath, 2 steaming cups of tea, and a fresh flannel day dress with wool stockings, Penelope was feeling like new, if a little worn out. She considered a nap, but Colin had asked that she come down when she was dressed. He'd seemed so worried for her that she couldn't bring herself to make him wait on her any longer. And so, as soon as Eloise's lady's maid finished retying her hair into a simple afternoon style, she found her way back to the drawing room. She was startled and just a bit disappointed when she found it empty. Penelope sat, warming herself by the fire, and admiring the decorating that had been done, despite their failure to retrieve the extra sled of holly Benedict had asked for. She was just beginning to consider taking a walk to the library in search of a book, when Colin appeared in the door. "Pen!" he shouted, rushing to her before stopping short. A steadying breath and a hard swallow later, he sank down on the sofa at her side, lifting her hands from her lap into his much larger, warmer ones. "Pen, are you all right?" he implored, not certain where to begin, but knowing her well-being was paramount. "Quite well, Colin. I'm so sorry to have caused such a fuss. I am so embarrassed to have caused you such distress that you felt the need to carry me. You must be exhausted from the exertion of it." Penelope looked away from where he clasped her hands in his, unable to meet his eyes for the flush that was rising in her cheeks. "Nonsense. The fault was mine. I should never have driven the sled so fast. He was unable to speak the words aloud, choking on them. Rather, he gripped her hands tight to convey his meaning. "Pen, you don't know how fearful I became. When I emerged from the snow and you were not to be found, I could not lose you. I dug and could not find you, and then when I did, at first I did not even know if your breath remained. You were so still, so pale. The moment I saw you breathe, the moment I knew that you were still of this world, my only concern was getting you to safety. You are my best friend. I cannot lose you." Penelope's face fell slightly, trying but failing to pull back her hands from his tight hold. "Your friend. Of course. Thank you. Your rescue was quite gallant indeed. I am only sorry that I gave you such a fright." "I am not," Colin replied decisively. "I believe I needed that fright. It is when I was searching for you that everything finally made sense, as if it all clicked into place." "Whatever could you mean?" she replied, turning her face up to his with a knit brow and a small shake of confusion. "What made sense?" "I love you," he blurted out, with no further preamble. "I love you, and I cannot imagine a life without you." Colin lifted from the sofa so that he could sink down onto one knee. Penelope, for her part, remained stock still, as if the slightest shift might cause the moment to crumble away to dust. He glanced out the window behind her a moment, at the vast, white landscape, thinking of how often he felt alone in the world. Except for Penelope. He was never truly alone. He had Penelope. "Pen, Penelope, I know we are both still quite young, and that this may be a shock to you, but before you turn me down, I ask that you give it some thought. As I said before, I cannot imagine a life without you, my best friend, at my side." As he spoke, he removed one of his hands from where he still held hers, reaching for his jacket pocket and retrieving the delicate gold ring he'd chosen for her earlier. "I wish for you to remain at my side always. I wish for you to be my wife." He presented her with his offered token of betrothal. "Will you marry me?" Penelope stared at him slack-jawed as her mind caught up to his words. A concerned look crossed her face as she looked from him to the ring held up in front of her and back again. Breathlessly, she whispered, You love me?" Colin nodded. "I suppose I have for quite some time, although I have only now realized it in earnest. I do not believe you changed. Not much, anyway. But seeing you in the snow like that, realizing how quickly I could have lost you, it changed me. Pen, I know you do not see me in the same way, but I do believe that in time—" "Hush, you!" she hissed, silencing him by gently moving her thumb to his lips, palming his cheek, while she studied his eyes for sincerity. Finding what she needed, she pressed on. "I love you too, Colin. I have loved you for years." Realization dawned in Colin's eyes, his eyebrows shooting up to his hairline. He took her hand from his cheek, pressing a passionate kiss to her palm. It was only when he dragged his lips away from her skin did he realize he was still on his knee, still holding up the ring he'd presented her with, still waiting for an answer. He huffed a soft laugh, turning over the hand he'd just kissed and bringing it down between them. "Well, are you going to marry me or what?" Tears of joy sprang from the corners of Penelope's eyes as she nodded her enthusiastic acceptance. "Of course I'll marry you!" Colin slid the ring home on her third finger, watching it a moment before pulling Penelope up to standing, leaning down to take her in his arms and kiss her properly. Their tongues had just begun to tangle when he heard Antony in the corridor, just outside the drawing-room door, instruct Humboldt that they would require champagne with dinner. Colin smiled against Penelope's lips, craning back to gaze into her shining eyes. They heard his mother try to silence a sob, advising the man, "Perhaps you ought to bring up a bottle now. We have much to celebrate." And they did have much to celebrate. It was a Merry Christmas, indeed. As we wrap up today's podcast episode, a heartfelt thank you to each and every one of you for tuning in. This is one of my favorite categories of fics. I read winter holiday fan fiction year-round. I love all the heightened fluff and angst and storms and accidents and generally exploring all the ways couples can keep warm. I love it all. And I'm happy I got to share one of my favorites with you. My sincerest gratitude to the talented Mrs. Tark for taking us on this beautiful ride. She shared with me that once she decided to write a song fic inspired by Jingle Bells, the whole story spilled out of her in one day. The images and action of the piece manifested so vividly in her mind that it was like transcribing a movie she had already watched. I have to say, that bit of information resonates with me, as the momentum of the piece is one of my favorite things about it. Before I sign off, I wanted to share that our featured author's recommendation for her favorite Pollen fic is Blind Temptation by Nevermore Read. Mrs. Tark appreciates that the fic has some absolutely visceral moments of connection between our beloved leads. She said the writing in Blind Temptation truly inspired her to strive in her own writing to try and elicit that guttural feeling and emotional reaction which Nevermore Read nailed so perfectly. Blind Temptation, as well as our featured fic Dashing Through the Snow and Mrs. Tark's AO3 author profile, will all be linked on the Fics and Recs Instagram and Twitter pages. Mrs. Tark wanted to let you know that she has not forgotten about her fic daddy issues. It's her goal to write and publish the final 2 chapters as soon as she's able. She thanks everyone that has supported her along the way and is always so thrilled to be able to share her stories with all of you. Stay tuned for our next episode. Until then, I'm WMN. Happy reading.